barely 4 weeks away now from the next United Nations Climate Change Conference, and many countries around the world are facing an unprecedented energy crisis right now. Brent and WTI Crude, both benchmarks used to price oil in European and North American markets, they've gone up by over 50% so far in 2021. As natural gas becomes increasingly expensive, some countries from China to the UK, they're turning back to coal to fill that emerging supply gap. As a result, households are facing steep increases in the price of energy, and that's translating into higher prices for other commodities. Even here in Africa, the food index in Kenya, for example, as I mentioned a little earlier in the hour, 10% higher in September. In Nigeria, food inflation hit its highest level in 15 years at a time when the pandemic has slashed the incomes of 70% of the population there. Hours ago, I spoke to Elsie Mbugua. She's the CEO and founder of Leadwood Energy. We explored how this energy crisis may affect or even frame talks at COP26. But first, we explored how we got here.
Demand has recovered quicker than had initially been expected. OPEC's forecast right now is $100 million per day plus, which is higher than even the pre-pandemic levels. And, it still seems that it's kicking on. So I think for OPEC, they're still in a position where they're still reacting. And so whereas before they had control as a result of the supply, which they hold, but now the entire narrative is driven by demand, and there's a lot of uncertainty with that.
Is OPEC perhaps responding a bit too slowly here? Because, we keep talking about OPEC Plus as this coalition that, drove supply, rather has relatively strong control over certain elements of supply. But given the demand shift that we're seeing now, can they react faster, or are there technical limitations to doing that?
Yeah, I think they are trying to do everything that they can. So I think what we're seeing is many of them, a lot of the OPEC countries, and this includes like OPEC ally Russia and several other countries, are really having a difficult time ramping up as quickly as possible. We're seeing that, that's the case with a lot of the top Africa oil producers as well. I think there's an element of the technical aspect is a lot of them postponed, critical investment last year when you had crude oil prices because they were hanging on for dear life. The other thing that we've been seeing is a lot of issues around maintenance. So there were critical spares that were required that were just not available during COVID. And so as a result of that, this is a lag that we're seeing.
You used to trade gas when you were working at JP Morgan, and we're seeing an enormous energy supply crisis in Europe and in Asia as well. Prices hitting levels that we haven't seen, quadrupling in some cases in the UK. When you're trading gas, did you ever see something like this?
No, this is again is unprecedented. So let me put it into context. I'm sure you're following the gas crisis in the UK at the moment. Gas prices have gone to $26 per MMBTU. So to put that into context, generally in the US, you'd be range bound between $2 to $4 per MMBTU. In Europe, or at least in the UK, it would generally be between $6 to $8 per MMBTU. We're at $26. And then further to that, if you're going to use it as an oil equivalent terms, this is $150 per barrel crude. So Ramah, this is expensive. This is very expensive and it's unsustainable.
This also does strengthen the argument for coal though, doesn't it? Because the trend over the last 5 years has been let's shut down the coal power plants, let's reduce our emissions. But now all of a sudden, you have this oil supply crisis, this gas supply crisis. Prices are getting to levels that are clearly unaffordable for utilities and households. So everyone's going to switch over to coal, right?
So I think not necessarily that it's going to be coal. I think places like China will move to coal. So inherently, I think what it is, it's a win for fossil fuels, not necessarily coal, because so for example, some countries are heavily dependent on nuclear. Some countries like the UK are heavily dependent on gas. I think what we're seeing is the energy where we are not seeing the energy flexibility or where we're not seeing renewables, holding fort, and where we're seeing energy crisis, then fossil fuels are, sort of coming into play.
And of course, the fossil fuel firms are benefiting quite a bit rather. Gazprom shares up, I believe, 70% so far this year. Sasol in South Africa has gone up by, I believe it's over 100% this year alone, just in terms of its share price increase.
Yeah.
So Where does this fit in, though, to the broader conversation around adaptation? Because COP26 is now just basically weeks away, and the conversation for a while has been we need to switch away from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are bad. But prices are going up now, and the solution, the immediate solution, is to switch to more fossil fuels in quite a few of these markets. How do you think this is going to play out at COP26?
So first, I think I would say the timing could not be worse for COP26 at the moment. With all the, at the moment, what we're seeing is, timing is bad because now we're talking about climate change issues, et cetera, and almost a stoppage of fossil fuels. And then the second thing is we're seeing an energy crisis in almost every single part of the globe except North America at the moment. We even saw the White House ask OPEC to pump more oil. We're starting to see IEA was asking Russia to pump more gas. So I think the reality is that in times of extreme weather, fossil fuels continue to save the day.
And even in COP20, with respect to COP26, the fact of the matter is, in the Paris Agreement, the argument was that we're going to provide developed economies to provide $100 billion a year in adaptation funding for developing countries. That money is not showed up. So here we are 5 years later, and a lot of the countries will show up and say, yeah, but you promised X amount of money for adaptation. We're not seeing it. We'll go with what we know, which more likely than not will just be fossil fuels.
Yeah, no, and you rightly call it. So first, the international community in many countries, especially ahead of COP26, I think it's almost every day that we're seeing, some type of announcement in support of the green economy. And I want to be clear that I am in support of energy transition. All I say is that energy transition has to be pragmatic, right? So I think, what we're saying is that the Paris Agreement was done during the Obama administration. I think for us as citizens, I think we should be asking the hard questions, even in light of COP26 coming up. We should be asking for more transparency. I think for the African continent in particular, I continue to stress that we certainly need to have a seat at the table in a lot of these climate change decisions. And, what we're seeing is that everything is not equal. So depending on where we are, like with a gas crisis, gas for the rich is energy security. Gas for the poor, climate can't afford it.